Hey YouTube. This is my third game of the quad that I played this month. I played against Stacia Pugh, and we played a Benko Gambit. So let's get right into the game. The Benko Gambit, as you probably know, D4, Knight F6, C4, and then C5 starts either the Benoni or the Benko Gambit. With the Benoni, you play E6, and with the Benko Gambit, you play B5. She played the B5 move, which is really aggressive and challenging. You don't see it that often as a D4 player, but I knew a little bit about it, right? So I had studied this, but I forgot. I forgot most of my prep against the Benko Gambit. So A6, I knew to play E3, and then after G6, I knew I should develop my knights, but I forgot the order. So I played Knight F3 instead of Knight C3. So Knight F3, Bishop G7, Knight C3, and then she played D6. And this, I think, is going to be the starting point for my analysis in the future, because this game has been played by this position has been played by lots of grandmasters over the years, and there's lots of grandmaster games that I can go to with this and see like how they played this and what kind of plans they made. You know, I really want to learn much better how to play the middle game in this sort of from this starting point. So I think what I'm going to do coming up in my future studies at some point is to look at the Benko Gambit in depth and look at a bunch of Grandmaster games, especially where White won, and see what happened. All right, so yeah, so basically I played a move here which is not quite out of book, but definitely not best. Best, I think, here, and a move I need to memorize is A4, supporting the B5 pawn. The B5 pawn is actually kind of strong here. You know, it kind of locks out the knight on B8. So, you know, White doesn't want to move this pawn, and A4 just helps support it. Yeah. So really, what you want to do is force Black to take here, because you know, White taking here actually just helps the development of the black pieces by either allowing the bishop to recapture or the knight to recapture, where as White hasn't really done much. And the reason that I'll tell you, I played b takes a6 here, and the reason I played that was kind of for some faulty reasoning. Basically, what I was thinking during the game was, I wanted to move my bishop and castle, but if I move my bishop, and then she takes, the thought I had was that, I'm going to have to either move my bishop again or my knight again to recapture the pawn. And I wanted to avoid this, right? Like, I didn't like the idea of moving my minor pieces more than once. and it's funny because the mistake I made, with taking, just looking at the position doesn't seem quite right. Obviously, there's no theory from this point. Like, there's no grandmaster or even any kind of master games from this point. But yeah, because I end up playing a move which ends up losing like 2 or 3 more tempos later. Queen A4 check. So this, I played this move, calculating that that neither of these minor pieces could block the check, right? It just loses a piece. If this knight moves, I take the bishop, and if this bishop moves, I'm taking the bishop, either way. Yeah, probably with the queen, right, to get off the rook. But and then I saw that if the queen blocks, then we trade queens, and maybe it's not so bad. We're in an endgame. Black has a fine endgame in the Benko, like with the pair of half open files for the rook, and then my half open file isn't nearly as good for my rooks. But I was more comfortable with that endgame than a complex middle game here with the queens on. So I was expecting queen d7 here, and I completely missed that she has this knight fd7 move. And when she played it, it seemed at a superficial level kind of bad, actually, because this knight really has no squares. Right, like this pawn is doing a great job of stopping knight c6, and her other pieces are just kind of like in the way. But as the game went on, the logic of this move really makes a lot of sense. She wants to play knight e5 into d3 eventually at some point later. So like this is kind of a plan in the Benko that she's familiar with, and we were talking about the game afterwards, and yeah, she said that she wanted to play this move anyway. So playing it in response to a check seemed completely natural. And I gotta say, after she surprised me with this move, right? Because I was not expecting the knight to go backwards. I was not expecting this knight to get, trapped by its own pieces. I really felt that I didn't know what I was doing, and felt like really uncomfortable at this point. And like having forgotten my prep and then improvising with pawn moves and queen moves that shouldn't have been played. I felt like I was definitely out of my comfort zone and was not comfortable here. And having won my first 2 games, I was thinking about the tournament situation. The most anybody else had was 1 point, and I had 2 points. It just worked out that way because Stacia had lost her first 2 games, and the other guys both had 1 point against her, right? So they lost against me, and then they were playing each other while I was playing Stacia. So at most one of those guys could have 2 points, and if I drew Stacia, I would have 2.5 and still be the clear winner. So at this point in the game, I thought, well, I'm obviously out of my element, but maybe I can hope for a draw, even if I don't know this middle game very well, and maybe we'll see. We'll see what happens. So I think at this point, obviously I wasn't going to give up winning chances, or play bad moves in order to get a draw specifically, but I wasn't really hoping for a win at this point. I took the bishop because I wanted to castle, and again, moving the bishop twice or having to recapture something after the bishop takes didn't seem good. So I took the bishop and it basically helped her develop her knight, right? And now with her rook being defended, this knight can move with tempo on my queen, and that's a consequence of this bad move, queen a4, which I told her after the game, I'm pretty sure queen a4 was terrible. Just because, I lost so many tempos moving my queen later, as you'll see. Okay, so then we both castle, and I move my last minor piece, and then she develops her queen, and we both have our rooks connected, and it's officially the middle game. I'm trying now. At this point, it's usually a good idea to put your rooks on better squares. I decided, since her queen's on the c file, maybe one of my rooks belong on the c file as well. I like the idea, like in the second game, of pinning this pawn in front of the queen so that maybe one of my pieces can land here safely, or even a pawn like could go to b4. So I played a rook to c1, and in deciding which one, I figured maybe this rook needs to be over here to help support like some pawn advances. So I played rook fc1, thinking that maybe this rook can come here or up to get off the long diagonal eventually. So the computer calls this an inaccuracy, and I don't really understand why. It says the best move was a3, I guess preventing the knight from coming into b4, which is fine. The knight on b4 does attack the queen indirectly with the rook, but yeah, I don't know. I do see the logic in a3, and I understand why the timing of a3 first as opposed to rook fc1 might have been better, because she does play knight b4 here, because I've allowed it, right? I didn't play a3 stopping it. So I moved my queen for the second time. I didn't want to go all the way back to the home square, and excuse me. I looked at briefly at queen b5, but yeah, I didn't want to deal with moving the queen yet again after the rook moves out. So I figured once the queen goes here, she has to move her rook here and then move the knight again before my queen has to move again. So that's how I chose queen b3 over the d1, which would basically and also instead of b5. So she plays the rook to b8 again, and now this is a threat which I did not see in the game. So she plays her rook here with the discovery on the queen, and with any discovery you have to look at all the places the knight can go, and to be menacing, right? So she's actually threatening, just simple knight d3, threatening the rook and threatening the queen. And I'll say that in my analysis, like I guess it didn't click to me that knight d3 was a double attack. So all I thought was that if I wanted the knight to go away, I could kick it, and then if the knight goes to d3, maybe I can trap it there. And so she probably has to go back. So what do? I play a3. And And I guess she thought the same thing. So we both missed that knight d3 was crushing here, and blundered, yeah, just knight back to a6. So the position's equal again, and yeah, we were both oblivious to this. So I played back the queen back to c2. This is probably where the queen belonged from the beginning. If I just played queen d1 to c2, I could have gotten a lot more progress in my position, not having to move the queen 2 more times to get back to where she belonged in the first place. Although I gotta say, I don't know that queen to c2 is even the best. Maybe queen to e2 is better. I'll have to look at that in the future, based on the Grandmaster games that I look at. So yeah, the queen ended up on c2, and now she played a surprising move, c4. I've only had this move played against me one time in a blitz or online game that I could recall, and the pawn on c4 in that game anyway became really weak, and it just ended up getting lost. But that opponent wasn't so good with their knights as Stacia was. So the way Stacia played this was really menacing with her knights, and made me want to trade this pawn off without trying to win it right away. So I'll show you how that developed. I noticed after the pawn advanced that suddenly these two squares are, kind of a weakness of the last move. Suddenly my pieces are available to go here. Well, none of my pieces could go here. So then I realized that knight d4 is possible. Okay, so I began to calculate, well, what happens if this trade happens, right? I had these double isolated pawns. So that looks kind of ugly for the endgame. But immediately for the middle game, I noticed that this actually looks quite good because my bishop is suddenly free. Her bishop vacates the king side, whereas my bishop can enter her king side. And also, this pawn does a great job of shutting out both of her knights quite nicely. So I wasn't afraid of the bishop trading for the knight at all. And knight d4 is also nice because it threatens to come into c6. So yeah, so I played knight d4, which, and the computer agrees, it's one of the top moves. So, and then here she played a great move, I think, that defended the c6 square and also looks to attack and bring the knight into d3. So the knight on e5 does a great job of eyeing the c6 square and also eyeing the d3 square, being aggressive. So it's a great centralized knight. I like that move a lot. And so my idea now was just to try to prevent or somehow fight against the knight coming into d3. And basically I wanted to undermine the support point for that outpost. So I played b3, hoping to trade on c4 and eliminate the knight coming into d3. So she took, and I took back with a knight, which is the only way I could. So now I was kind of happy this knight wasn't coming to d3, but then she played knight c5, and suddenly the knight can come into d3. And it's interesting, like, it's actually really difficult for me to try to fight against this square now. Like my pieces are all really kind of far away from the square in terms of defending it. This knight can capture on c5, but I don't think that was very good. Instead, I looked for counterplay. So knight d4 again, knight back to d4 into c6 could be possible at some point. And what I saw during the game was that knight d4. If this knight comes in, maybe I can move my rook and then play f4, and then these knights kind of become loose. So f4 would be a threat. Excuse me. F4 would be a threat. With the knights being connected like this, kicking one of the knights with a pawn usually is a good idea. So I guess I thought that one of these knights coming into d3, especially this knight coming into d3, wasn't the end of the world. And if this knight moved into d3 with my knight on d4, suddenly this knight's not eyeing c6 anymore, so I could go into c6 eventually. So I play knight d4, and she moves the e knight into d3, probably also realizing that f4 is a possibility if this knight comes in. The computer is crazy. It thinks that this move is wrong and that this move is better. I can't possibly understand that. I guess the computer is fine with defending against ideas like f4 really easily. I don't think I don't think many humans would choose to put this knight on d3. But okay, computers are computers. So now I made my second blunder of the game. Not realizing, not even calculating all that much. I think she'd used more time than me at this point. We're in 20 moves. I think I probably had like a 3 or 4 minute time advantage, and I wanted to keep at least a minute or two time advantage the whole game, just like I did with my first game. I wanted to try to keep the pressure on the clock the whole game, and I probably played the next move too quickly because I didn't consider all of her forcing moves as her replies, right? So I basically played my next move, realizing, she can take my rook, but hey, I can take her rook too, without even calculating. So I just played this move, not even considering where her rook could go, or what would happen after she takes my rook and I take hers. And it turns out that both moving this rook to attack my queen and taking this rook both win for white. I'm sorry, both win for black. So she had two winning moves here, rook b2 and knight takes c1. And this was really discouraging after the game because I realized how badly I played. Because you want your wins to be good wins, not just because your opponent didn't see your blunders. And it's frustrating, right? Because like I was trying to be disciplined and calculate as much as I could, but I was also kind of quote unquote worried about the clock situation, wanting to make sure that I don't get into trying to make sure that I'm not the one getting into time trouble. So, so I played knight c6 here, and during the game, actually, as soon as I played knight c6, I realized that the rook b2 was crushing. I did not see that knight takes c1 was good until after the game, going over it with a computer. But yeah, rook b2, I saw this during the game, and I was pretty sure I was just losing the exchange. It turns out I was, but she didn't play it. What's funny is she picked up her rook, and I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm going to get down the exchange. So I was just getting ready to fight being down the exchange, but then she stops and plays rook b3 instead of rook b2. And suddenly, I'm like, oh, so I forget all about that blunder, right? This is what you have to do in chess. You completely forget about your past mistakes and just look at the position objectively and see what happens from here. And basically I just realized, she looks like she's threatening to win this pawn, and I need to save my rook. So what do I do? Whoops. So what do I do here? Realizing that I guess she wants to win this pawn back. I see that the b file could end up being vacated, and then I might have a back ring check. I like the idea of my rook coming to b1 and then checking on b8, forcing the bishop back, right, to defend, and then ending up pinning itself on the back rank, and then maybe my bishop or queen can do some damage on the king side, coordinating with a rook on the back rank. So yeah, that was an idea of mine when I played rook cb1. I didn't calculate that actually the taking on a3 is a big blunder. She did play rook takes a3, and basically I was still set with this idea of rook b8 after realizing, of course, I couldn't play it right away. Well, I guess I could have, honestly, because it's check. And while this move is check, she has to deal with my check first. But I trade rooks. I'm glad I didn't play it like that. Actually, wait a minute. No. If I take this way, she just takes here. Well, even that's okay, right? Because I go here. But anyway, I'm glad I did it the way I did, because after this trade of rooks, this rook is hanging. And it turns out, while I was looking at all this rook b8 check nonsense, I realized that this knight fork is a possibility. And then looking deeper and calculating a little bit more into the knight fork, I realized that her queen can't actually move to defend the rook at all, because the knight's doing such a good job of handling the dark squares around the queen side. So knight b5 is actually just devastating. She can't defend the knight, she can't defend the rook, and the rook is just dead. She plays queen d7 after some time, and I didn't snap the rook off right away, because I wanted to make sure that her queen coming into the king side was not that big of a deal. I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting killed over there. And it looks kind of scary, right? Like all of my pieces, literally all of my pieces are on the queen side over here, and her queen coming to the king side could be dangerous, right? So I had to spend some time looking at that for a minute before I took the rook, and yeah, I just decided that I could probably defend no problem, because my queen and rook can come back to the king side, or at least I the king side at some point. Yeah, and the bishop could come back and defend f2 or something, whatever. I could probably get back in time. So she plays a move which threatens f2, queen here threatening f2, and before, because I saw immediately that one of the bishop moves, some bishop move would defend f2 indirectly with the queen, but then I decided to take a minute and step back and realize, okay, do I have any attacking moves? And I just realized that there's this check possible with the rook, like I was looking at before this knight fork happened. And I calculated that the rook coming here would be back rank. Check, the bishop would have to be forced back just like before. And then I realized that the bishop is looking at this pawn, but it's not defending it. So I could just take it. And then that would come with check. And then I realized it's also attacking the queen. And then suddenly I realized, oh, I could just take this right now. So that's what I did. I just took the pawn, and she resigned just basically immediately. After realize she's losing her queen here. So yeah, that was a tough game. Like I felt that because I realized that I blundered it once in the middle of this game, and was happy to have saved it or whatever. Yeah, I was definitely nervous almost the whole game. One, because I'm facing the Benko Gambit and I wasn't that well prepared against it, and two, because yeah, like I blundered, and I realized that I blundered, and I just got lucky that she didn't see it. So yeah, and then of course looking at the game later with the computer, realizing that I blundered even more than just the one time that I saw was pretty humbling. Anyway, it was an interesting game. It was the third game of the night, so I ended up with 3 out of 3, and I won the quad. Stacia, I guess, got all losses that night, so it's kind of a bad night for her. But hope you keep playing, Stacia. Obviously, keep coming back and fighting. You'll snap right back out of it, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you guys next time, and stay tuned. Next month, I'll be playing another tournament and doing recap videos a lot like this. So hope to see you next time.